Welcome everyone to the fourth listening session in our Community of Conscience Listening Forum. Before we begin, it's timely that this morning's session is on policing. As I'm sure everyone is aware, over the weekend there were two members of the African American community shot by police, and I just want to take a moment to recognize that and to remember why we're all here together to work as community members and police and stakeholders to create a world where people like Trayford Pellerin in Lafayette, Louisiana, and Jacob Blake in Kenosha, Wisconsin, are not shot for being Black. And we don't know what what these people may or may not have been guilty of, but we are a country where we're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty, and certainly no one deserves to be shot in the back 7 times while walking to their car in front of their children. Excuse me. The Community of Conscience was launched in 2019 to advance our shared values of pluralism, civil discourse, and mutual respect. Among our membership are top faith, ethnic, civic, and elected leaders from around the community, and we unite across diverse backgrounds and perspectives to honor the American ideal as we strive together to form a more perfect union. We appear to find ourselves in a watershed moment in our nation's history. Recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many other Black lives have sparked a national and even global conversation that seems different. For the first time since the civil rights era, one can sense a real opportunity for significant systemic change. In June, under the leadership of Community of Conscience members Catherine McGill, Pastor and State Representative Carl Sherman, Imam Khalid Shahid, and Dr. Lindsay Wilson, Interim Equity Officer for the City of Dallas, planning began on this series of listening and learning opportunities. The idea behind this is to do a deep dive into issues of pervasive racism and white supremacy that will inform our future advocacy efforts, culminating in next week's session on policy with Representatives Eddie Bernice Johnson and Mark Vesey. As a supplement to these sessions, our summer intern, Carly Hacker, is putting together a resource guide with suggested additional readings and resources, bios of our panelists and moderators, and relevant statistics. This will be sent out to all registrants upon completion of the series and will include links to the videos of the different sessions. Throughout our 113-year history, AJC has consistently worked to advance equity, advocate for civil and human rights, and celebrate diversity. We recognize that the fight against bigotry, anti-Semitism, and hate is all of our responsibilities, and we're proud to convene these sessions as an important step in this process. Before I turn the program over to Rabbi Paley, I want to make sure everyone is aware that AJC is a nonpartisan 501c3 organization. We also would like to ask that everyone remain muted, and if you have a question, please email it to dallas@ajc.org. A final bit of housekeeping: in planning these sessions, the committee placed a high value on creating a sense of community by using the meeting format as opposed to the webinar format in which you can only see the panelists. Personally, I found it meaningful to toggle between the gallery view so that I can feel I'm part of a larger group, and the speaker view, which allows me to focus more on our presenters. You can do this by clicking where indicated on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dallas Police Chief Renee Hall was appointed to Chief of the Dallas Police Department in 2017, becoming the first woman to ever lead the organization. Prior to her appointment as chief, she served as Deputy Chief of the Detroit Police Department. Her vision, aligned with 21st century policing, focuses on the reduction of crime, increasing recruitment and retention, providing new opportunities for officer career development, and modernizing the organization's effectiveness through advanced technology. She is committed to improving and nurturing community relationships. Drew Diamond, who I've gotten to know through his current role as Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Tulsa and Sherwin Miller Museum of Jewish Art, has a long career and track record in policing and working around these issues. He, for 16 years, was Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the Police Executive Research Forum. He's the retired Tulsa Chief of Police, completing 22 years of service with the Tulsa PD and serving as chief from October of 87 until his retirement in November of 91. He is widely recognized as a leader in community policing and for his commitment to community service, initiating a number of progressive community-oriented reforms while chief of police. During 1995, he carried out a 9-month assignment in Washington, D.C. as Director of Community Policing Consortium Project funded by the Department of Justice. He's coordinated efforts of consortium members, which include the International Association of Chiefs of Police, the Police Foundation, the National Sheriff's Association, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and Police Executive Research Forum in designing and delivering community policing training and technical assistance nationwide. He's also worked internationally in Bosnia during the spring of 1996, providing technical assistance to the International Police Task Force, and in recent years has completed projects with the Jamaica Constabulary Force, providing community policing and training for officers and community members, and in Great Britain with the British Transport Police, providing training and technical assistance. Tonya McClary is a pastor, lawyer, advocate, organizer, and artist. Her life's works are in the areas of transformative justice, criminal justice, healing, civil and human rights, and for over 2 decades, Tonya has been realizing this vision. In February of this year, Tonya became the first police monitor and director for the Office of Community Police Oversight for the city of Dallas. Prior to that, she was chief monitor over use of force at the Office of the Independent Police Monitor in New Orleans. Because of her work, Tonya's former department has become a model for other oversight agencies in the country working on use of force related issues. Finally, our moderator today, Rabbi Andrew Mark Paley, is the senior rabbi and spiritual leader of Temple Shalom, a Reform congregation here in Dallas, Texas. Ordained in 1995, he holds a master's in Hebrew letters from the HUC Jewish Institute of Religion and a bachelor's degree in industrial and organizational psychology from The Ohio State University, and is a Prepare, Enrich certified marital and premarital counsel. For the city of Dallas, he serves as a Dallas police chaplain, was a member of the Mayor's Task Force on Poverty, a member of the Dallas Morning News Faith Advisory Committee, a regular opinion contributor, and a founding member and chair-elect of Faith Forward Dallas at Thanksgiving Square. He's also involved with Faith Leaders United for Peace and Justice, a board member of the Senior Source, and chair of its Interfaith Advisory Committee, and a member of the Muslim Jewish Advisory Council of the Dallas chapter of AJC. So Rabbi Paley, with that, I turn it over to you and put the program in your capable hands.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you everyone for being here today for this important conversation. And let it be known that this is really the beginning of what we pray will be a series of continuing conversations about the issues that are important to each of us personally, to our families, to our neighborhoods, to our community, and ultimately to our country. We for sure will not solve all of the issues, but hopefully will begin to really address and lay out on the table the areas of concern that are pressing in our hearts at this time. So thank you for being here today. And again, if you have questions or have issues you'd like to raise, please address them to dallas@ajc.org, and Joel and his team will be able to address those in a timely and appropriate way. So I'd like to begin, as Joel did actually, by thinking of those souls who are in our hearts right now, and those who have been victims of violence lately at the hands of police that have been in public view in such a prominent and difficult way. And so it brings to mind the question, of course, of policing and public safety. And I'd like to sort of begin with this issue in mind about public safety and what is really required in communities to address safety in communities, wherever those communities may be. Granted, particularly in our city, where there are so many different kinds of communities and so many different kinds of needs that those communities have. And this question of public safety was actually brought up in a recent report by the U.S. Conference of Mayors on their report on police reform and racial justice. And they ask a question that I'd like to pose to our panelists here, which is around this issue of public safety and frankly, who is best equipped to be the first responder in addressing the long list of calls for service. And as we think about what is needed in our communities and how we can best deploy the resources for those, I'd like actually to start with Chief Hall, if you might respond, and who might be the best equipped to answer these calls as they come in, as we tackle the issues of public safety.
So good morning to everyone. It's always a pleasure, a blessing, and an honor to be able to come before the community. The first I would say is, in order for us to discuss who's appropriate, we have to figure out what those challenges are. Far too often, law enforcement has been given the responsibility of everything, whether that's business, simple individuals who actually just have no place to go, whether it's domestic violence, abuse. Those are the kinds of things that we have to examine and say, is first responders, are the police the individuals that need to be the first responders to those instances? I pose the question often, if an individual is experiencing a mental health challenge, you call 911. What we're equipped with on our tool belt is mace, we have a taser, and a firearm. And if either one of those are not the outcomes that we want in that situation, then why are police officers the first individuals to respond to that individual who is in crisis? So I think we have to work alongside of our community stakeholders, of our politicians, and everyone in our city to determine the right care for the individuals in our communities, and recognize that police are responsible for the safety of individuals. And if we are focused on that, that means responding to calls for service. That means going after those individuals in crime and investigating that. And that is what we're called to do. But when we are to do everything else, it becomes difficult for us to truly get the right care that individuals need, and which poses a lot of challenges. The more interaction we have with our community in a capacity of policing and response, the greater opportunities there is for conflict and or uses of force. So we need to create the space around our community that we are there for help and not to respond to a crisis in a negative way. So that is what our city should be focused on, our police department. I think the city manager, myself, during this budget cycle, we're focused on making sure that we're putting the right pieces in place so that our community can have the right response from first responders.
Thank you. Mr. Diamond, you want to respond?
Hi, first of all, thank you all for allowing me, at least virtually, to cross the Red River. You know, I was saying earlier, it's in all the years, particularly on my connections and work in policing in Dallas and in North Texas, I don't even need a passport anymore to get to you guys. Let me build a little bit on what Chief Hall said. She's got it right, but in a little different sense. You know, I'm committed to community policing, to community engagement, problem solving, to the old sense that in a democracy, the police are the people and the people are the police, 1829, Sir Robert Peel sense. If you think about what the best patrol officer delivering an honest, equitable police service is, then you'll get my sense of policing. I believe that police should not, as Chief said, be responsible for solving every social ill that there is out there, but they are going to be the first responders. What we have to be careful about is not to turn them into only an armed response team. 80% of everything a police officer does, whether in Dallas or in Tulsa, or anywhere in this country, is social work. Whether they like it or not, we're about social problem solving because we have the ability, just like firefighters and medical services, to be on the scene. The question is, what resources have we put in that beat officer's pockets? What training have we given? What leadership have we given to recognize that I have never called myself in the 50 years in policing service a law enforcement officer, because I recognized early on that I was delivering a unique service, an honorable service, and that the sense of it was I needed community help. I needed to know who to call. I needed the resources to be able to put in my pocket. And that sense of how you build that, the most successful policing services in this country, the most successful police officer in this country is able to work that network and respond appropriately and honestly, and get to dealing with those issues that are so complex, particularly about race.
Great, thank you. Ms. McClary, you want to respond?
I just want to echo, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I'm excited to be here for this conversation. And to just tag on to what both chiefs said, I think that, one of the issues is, who should be out there. And so I think even though this has become controversial, this question around the defund movement, I think that if people look at it and see that the community in many places is not calling for the police department to be shut down, it's called on sharing resources. If you look at the budgets of many cities, the police department holds the majority of the budget. And I think the question is, can we take some of those resources and funnel it into things to have teams of people respond that are not necessarily the police? When I was in New Orleans, the department I created was over use of force, and a majority of our use of force cases were people that were in mental health crisis. I mean, we had people in medical crisis being tased and other things. And so even though I know the chief was saying that, we give police officers a lot of tools on their belt, sometimes people with specialized training should be the ones that are responding, and the police should maybe be there to back them up in case there's violence or things of that nature. And so I think we really have to assess what it is, and can we come up with creative ways, and maybe Chief Hall will talk about the initiative she's doing in Dallas to talk about creative ways to have the police respond with others that have expertise in certain fields, to hopefully have more community trust, to hopefully have less numbers in terms of uses of force, et cetera. And I think that we have to, recognize that the police have a lot on them. It's just as Chief Hall said, most of the time when people call 911, it should not be something that the police are really responding to. But because in many of our cities, we've defunded mental health issues, we've defunded detoxification centers, et cetera, every single thing gets put on the police. And so I have sympathy for that. So from calling because my cat's in the tree, to my son's not on his medication, I don't know what to do, to, my boyfriend just hit me, and everything in between, and et cetera. And so I think we have to give them support. And so sometimes the support means that it shouldn't be them that's responding. It should be people with specialized training for those needs.
So thank you for saying that. And as we begin to address this issue in a much more profound way, it's really been sort of brought up for many years now, communities like ours and here in Dallas have formed community police oversight boards. And so maybe Tonya, you could explain your role a little bit and your relationship with the city, with the chief, and how that works.
So it's interesting. I kind of say it's a new day in the city of Dallas. There has been a citizens review board for double-digit years, 25, 30 years. But that board really didn't have any teeth. It didn't really have power to do anything. And so when the citizens of Dallas started reimagining things, they started saying, shouldn't we be having more of an oversight role? And so the board is no longer a review board, it's now the Community Police Oversight Board. And with that, they have powers that they never had before. So they have subpoena power, they also have investigatory power, they have the ability to review things that are happening in the police department, to give recommendations, et cetera. And so, and this is a board from the community. There is a 15-member board. The mayor and each of the city council appoint someone to that board. So there's someone that's sitting, that's representing every district in the city of Dallas. And so it really is a board, and they're also tasked with community engagement. So this is not a board where they're supposed to just, kind of hang this certificate on the shelf, so to speak, or put it on their wall for show. This is a board where they're expected to be out in the community, hearing from the constituents of those districts and bringing those issues back to the chief, to the city manager, and to city council in terms of what they're hearing in policing. And then my office is just totally brand new. There's never been a police monitor in the city of Dallas. And so my job is to really kind of be the go-between. This is how I see myself, as the go-between between the community and the police department, and also for accountability. So I think Chief Hall was one of your officers that explained my role when I ran into them. I said, what do you think we do? And they said, you're like the civilian version of internal affairs. And I said, exactly. And so I love that. And I've been saying that ever since. And so it's our job to also, bridge that gap between the community and the police. And so that people start to feel more confidence in the police department, that the police department is more transparent. And so there's the board, and then there's me, and I'm also kind of foot soldiers for the board. So a lot of the work that they're wanting to do in the city, they task it to my office to perform and to carry out.
Thank you for that. So in this report, and I recommend everybody should read it, it's really an amazing report by the U.S. Conference of Mayors. The report describes a series of values that they hold as part of their recommendations for police reform and racial justice. And one of them they describe as sanctity of life. It's a core feature of police responsibility as they see it as mayors. There's a little bit of course, historical irony built into that, as police units were formed out of a post-Civil War era of maintaining order for white communities and trying to maintain a distance of or some sort of perceived sort of boundary from slaves or former slaves in the Black community and the white communities that they were purportedly protecting. And it has evolved, of course, into an area of our lives that we depend on and that we hope takes seriously the sanctity of life. And with all of the safety and public safety issues that are going on, it's, I suppose, important that the mayors came out with this as a core feature and a core value highlighting this. I'd like to sort of ask the chief and the former chief in particular, how is sanctity of life as a value implemented as part of police officers' training and their ongoing training in the field? Chief Hall,
So
you want to start?
Yes, sir. I'll take that. And I think that, I want to start by saying police officers, we are driven by protection and safety. I think that when we talk about training and reimagining policing and going back to the basics and doing away with some of the systemic things that have plagued our agencies for many years, we have to take into consideration how we train. And we have trained for many years for our officers to come home at night. So they're trained that with everything that you do, your responsibility is, to save your life, and you make it back home to your family. And one of the things that we have to get kind of regimented into our training program is it is important for everyone to go home. Every encounter has to be an encounter where both individuals are safe. And I think when we talk about sanctity of life, that is the most important piece, because it is about everybody's life being important and valued. And every encounter is an opportunity for us both to build relationships, but it's also for both of us to, police and community, to make sure that we both walk away from that particular encounter safe, secure, with the best possible outcome, even if that outcome is arrest. But everyone is safe in that process and alive. And I think those are the kinds of trainings that have to be within our police agency, because if we're going to have a real conversation and a true conversation, officers for many years, and I've been a cop for 22 years, I'm going home tonight. And Chief Don, you can probably attest to that same thing. Although there is a huge focus on community and taking care of our community, it's always been, but in order for us to take care of the community, we have to take care of ourselves first. So the retraining of ourselves has to be, everyone has to be has to have that same level of priority.
Thank you. Chief Diamond.
Yes, I agree wholeheartedly, Chief Hall. But in policing, you can't have it both ways. The culture of policing in this country, all policing is local. There are 900,000 women and men in policing in this country, in over 14,000 municipal agencies and 3,000 sheriff's departments. And they all have some differences, but there's some core things in this culture that are the same, and we just touched on one of them. The idea that you can't see yourself. I couldn't, as a police officer, see myself as brave, strong, and heroic, and then say my main goal is not to get hurt. And so and in terms of putting there is implicit risk in delivering policing services, and the object of the exercise, though, is, as the Chief said, not to get anybody hurt. But in terms of violence in our community, and I want to touch this into our discussion about race, there is we don't want anybody to be murdered in our communities. And all that being said, when a police officer is killed in the line of duty, and by the way, I'm a survivor of a number of police shootings myself, so I can speak to this. That has an effect on the community that is a little more far-reaching. And when a police officer commits murder, when a police officer is the source of the violence, it has the same level of effect beyond the nature and the tragedy of people being criminally killed. And so our sense of where we are today in police officers responding, I mean, what you will hear out of policing in any one of the police-involved shootings, and I've investigated a great bit more than I like to think about these things, the police officers will say they acted aggressively. They created a new term here culturally, aggressing. They didn't comply, or my life was in danger. And that's the overall blanket justification involved in shooting. And when you add race into this complex matter, then who you hire, how you train them, and how you lead them will determine the outcome you're going to get.
So, Rabbi, I'd like to jump in on that question.
Yes, please. Yeah.
I want to give it from the civilian perspective. So Chief Diamond, when he was talking in terms of, things that happen, also sanctity of life just means for everyone. I think a lot of times in police shootings, the community feels like it's very one-sided. We're worried about the officers in the situation, that the family of the loved one who was taken is often lost. And so, and in many cases, that's true. And so my office has a philosophy. I don't care if somebody was in a shootout with the police and were killed in that way. It's not about the wrongdoing at that point. It is about that was somebody's son or daughter, mother or father, and we have to think about that. And so when I was in New Orleans, we worked with a group called Families Overcoming Injustice. They did a family bill of rights, and these were all people who had a loved one killed by the New Orleans Police Department. And some of the things around sanctity of life they talked about is, can my loved one be covered up? So we work with the police department to buy screens in every district, because people talked about they came and their loved one laid in the middle of the street for hours. It's just in view of everyone. So these are things that people don't talk about. Nobody gave our family support. The police department, the police officers that involved get a lot of support from their community, but where do we go as a family? Is there a way to help, funnel us towards grief counseling and things of that nature? And also, can we be notified? Before we cut on the television and hear that Johnny was killed, and somebody try to call us and let us know that the person is dead? So when we talk about sanctity of life, I know a lot of people, because policing is difficult, if someone was quote unquote wrongdoing, they might have been in an armed robbery or doing whatever, we somehow seem to say that their life is not worth acknowledging. And so I think that when we talk about the sanctity of life, we have to talk about the sanctity of all lives. And so I really wanted to just speak to the other side of that in terms of the families that are grieving the loss of their loved one, even if their loved one may have been engaged in quote unquote wrongdoing when they were killed by the police.
Yeah, thank you for that. And just to follow up, so could you maybe address or speak to how your office is addressing that here in town, or what steps might be taken to sort of highlight that? And maybe there's a way that Dallas could lead the way in demonstrating for other communities this value that we sense is agreed upon in the largest context, but somehow difficult to always define in real tactical ways. Maybe are there things that you might suggest specifically for our community that you see? I know you've been on the job a few months now, but maybe there's something that you might prioritize.
I mean, I think one of the things is that, I worked with Chief Hall on the video release policy. I think that that's going to be a tremendous game changer in the city of Dallas. I mean, for many years before her reign, people whose loved one was killed never saw video footage, never knew what happened to their loved one, et cetera. And so I think at least having people be able to see what happened and have that information released is going to be very, very important. Also, our office is working with groups like Mothers Against Police Brutality and other groups and families to hear what their concerns are and to take those concerns to the police department. And sometimes they're not even involved in, officer-involved shootings. We've heard concerns from people whose loved one was killed by another civilian about not hearing back from a detective or whatever. And so our office is trying to play a kind of a victim liaison role in terms of getting a hold of the police department and getting a hold of the homicide division and saying, hey, can you give Mrs. Jones or Mr. Jackson a call? They have concern about their case. And so really just trying to hear from the community about what their concerns are, still learning the police policies to see if there's ways that it could be more inclusive for families. So Rabbi, there will be more to come as I delve deeper into the policies and practices, but those are some of the things that we've been working on currently.
Great. So I'd like to just talk for a second as a person in a religious minority community here in Dallas, and that there are many and varied kinds of communities. Dallas is a sprawling metropolis. I'm just wondering what might be done to ensure that public safety issues and community policing issues kind of mirror, or in some way at least kind of look like, if that's possible, the communities that they serve, and what role these elements from these communities can help to support that. So, Chief Diamond, you want to?
Yeah, we came up with years ago. I worked on a national project called Hiring in the Spirit of Service. But even back into, I'm beginning to sound like the old guy back in the old days. When we started in 1987, when I had put together my first recruit class, which was the first time in the history of the Tulsa Police Department. By the way, Tulsa is like Dallas, is a major city that is racially divided, both physically and emotionally racially divided. And I had a majority of Black officers, recruit officers, and women in that class. And I had a couple senior staff members raise the concern that we had that this was reverse racism, that we were somehow squeezing out white applicants. By the way, none of that was true. And I pointed out to them that that in order for our police department to begin to feel like, look like, and deliver services like the community, the complex community it serves, it would take another 25 classes like the one we just put together to reach that kind of parity, and so, this sense of what I'm trying to get to here is the embedded kind of, for lack of a better word, white grievance inside the system. Racially biased policing, I can tell you, if I know anything after all these decades, is baked in to policing services in this country. And that's why this struggle is so difficult. Police officers, in my estimation, when it comes to race, come to three levels. They're either perpetrators in terms of this discussion, or they're bystanders to the perpetrators, or they're upstanders. There's two smaller groups in that are the perpetrators and the upstanders. The majority officers are bystanders around the misbehavior, and particularly the racially biased behavior of their fellow officers. That is a core problem. A few years ago when Black Lives Matter, particularly emerging out of Ferguson, arose, I suggested to police unions around the country, by the way, to no avail, when I was asked, that they should take out signs, instead of taking out signs that say Blue Lives Matter, because the communities already feel Blue Lives Matter, is to take out signs and say, we, the Fraternal Order of Police, agree, Black Lives Matter. They couldn't bring themselves to do that. And so this core issue, it really is, it was then, is now about race and how we begin to emerge from this baked in issues.
Yeah, thank you for that. Chief Hall?
So when we talk about the police departments being reflective of the community, 21st century policing tells us that in order for us to truly be successful, we have to be able to reflect our community, because people genuinely trust those who look like them. And so we know this from history, we know this for best practices. And so when we look at the city of Dallas, 43% of the city of Dallas is Hispanic. 27% is African American, and our police department must reflect that. It has been a goal of mine since I walked in the door to ensure that we are recruiting in areas that are largely Hispanic and or African American, to make sure that we are targeting those individuals who represent our community. Also taking in mind that some of the challenges for joining the police department. When we look at our Latino or Hispanic population and African American population, we say some of them have challenges as it relates to education. We have educational requirements. We're not saying that that's something we need to eliminate, but we need to create an opportunity for those individuals to be a part of our organization. So the Dallas Police Department partnered with Dr. Hinojosa for a P-TECH program and a Pathways project, so that in our high schools in Dallas, Sunset, Carter, and Bryan Adams, largely African-American, Hispanic, Latino Hispanic schools, that we created a program, a pipeline straight to the Dallas Police Department. These individuals have a criminal justice curriculum. Police officers in the police department are instructors in the Law Enforcement Academy. They receive associate degree credit, and when they graduate, they are then have the ability to be employed by the Dallas Police Department, whether in a non-sworn capacity until they're 19 and a half, and then they can join the police department. So that is a direct route to bringing individuals who are from the community, who have a stakehold in the community, who are already ingrained in their communities, bringing them to the police department, thus building upon our relationships. And so that is a huge piece of us being successful. If we're truly going to talk about building legitimacy and trust, we have to form and formulate our agency in the way that's going to build the most trust. And making members of our community a part of our agency is one of the ways to build trust and build legitimacy. And so that is something that we're working on and continue to work towards. And we're asking our community, how much more can we do? What else can we do to continue to build upon those relationships? And it's not just from a racial perspective, but also whether it's ethnicity, whether it's religion. We have to make sure that every member or individual LGBTQ that's reflected in our community is reflected in our police department, so that we truly are servicing our community as a whole.
Yeah, if I might add one caveat. I think that's absolutely correct, but we have to make sure along the way, and it is a challenge, that any police officer of any race, religion, sexual orientation can deliver that honest, equitable police service anywhere to anybody in their community. What you don't want to end up with is the sense that the Tulsa Police Department, within my lifetime, used to assign only Black officers to Black neighborhoods, and the white officers hung around the perimeter, and those are the kind of things that have implicit racism in it, and will lead to more and more racial violence inside our cities. So both things can happen concurrently. You can train everybody up to, and because we've done it and we've seen officers do it, we know it can be done. It's not magic, to be able to police properly across racial lines and still show that the department reflects the communities that they are policing.
And I would just like to say, Chief Diamond, excellent point. One of the challenges that we have, even right in our police department, is the division. We have 4 different unions, associations, and they're all divided by race. And so have some internal challenges to make sure that we're not dividing ourselves on the inside. We have a Latino association, a Black association, an Asian association, and then we have our largest organization that's predominantly white. So if we're divided within our own agency, how are we truly delivering good service to our community? So that's an excellent point, and something that has challenged me since the day I walked in the door, to make sure that we are not continuously perpetuating some of the racial divide that we see within the city of Dallas, within our police department.
And Chief Hall, and I know you know this, but for our friends on this session, in policing, the Black Officers Associations, Latino Officers Associations rose because the white unions would not represent them. As a matter of fact, acted against them, acted not in their interest. That's how they came about. To put that balance back in is going to be a lot of trust building inside agencies around these issues. You know, I came up through a major city police department as the only Jewish police officer, certainly their only Jewish police chief. I thought at times I'd have to form my own organization, you know, and I knew I would be the president and the vice president, and you know, it was too much work. But the point I'm making is I'm agreeing with Chief Hall wholeheartedly. What people don't see from the outside many times about their own police departments is this kind of culture, which is pretty vibrant and intense inside the agency.
So I want to leave a little bit of time for questions, but I just want to your point, Chief, that I spoke recently about how we have sort of devolved in many ways in our communities and our neighborhoods into this binary sort of being, that we only see things either as zeros or ones, that there is a lost art of nuance in being able to have a complex conversation about issues that are important to us. And I would argue that no one is either one or the other, and yet we are forced into these polarities, deciding whether we are for the police or against the police, or we do that, or so these yes or no things. And so I'd like to ask, and whoever would like to sort of jump in first, what kind of optic or language might be helpful or useful in demonstrating to our community that while there are persistent and pervasive issues that the police alone cannot solve, and that we will not solve here today either, but we can take bold steps in reminding people that placing people and ourselves in camps opposite because we are not this or they are that is just not helpful and productive. And so I'm wondering what kind of optic, what kind of language would you recommend for us as we try to tackle these issues of racism and public safety and all of the sort of topics that are in our hearts and our minds right now. Chief Paul, would you like to start?
Yeah, so Rabbi, if I can, it's exactly the language you spoke. We have to be bold in our conversation, because if we are not, we are forced into a box. I am a Black woman who is a police officer and also happens to have experienced racism and misogyny and sexism within my agency and outside in my community. So no one is going to put me in a box and say I'm either for the police or against the police. I am not in a box. I am Black, I am blue, I am woman, which is all something different within law enforcement, because predominantly white males rule law enforcement. And I am a Black woman leading one of the largest police departments in the country, and that comes with its own level of scrutiny from so many different angles. And so if we're gonna have a true conversation, we have to be bold and say, I support the community, because I do. I am a police chief that 40 years trying to get an oversight board in the city of Dallas. I'm the police chief that supported it. And so I support the community looking over our shoulder and saying we need to do better. But I also support the fact that the officers do a great job. We can do better. And I am going to call us out when we don't do it well. I am going to take the scrutiny that when we screw up, because if we truly want to foster an avenue or a culture of change and giving officers an opportunity to say, you can mess up, it's okay, and we can fix it, then we have to embrace that. So no matter how much I get beat up, we're going to acknowledge our flaws, we're gonna fix them, and we're gonna move forward if the Lord will allow me to continue to stay in this space. So I think we have to have bold conversations and not be allowed to be put in a box, because we're not one thing or the other. We are individuals existing in a very challenging time that is exposing a lot of racial as well as religious biases and all kinds of things that take place. And we have to navigate our way through them using clear, direct, honest conversation, addressing the issues. There are systemic issues in policing, racial issues, sexist issues, all kinds of issues that we have to address. Does that make the police department bad? It does not. It means that we need some work. And there are some issues in our community. We have some crime issues. We have some challenges that we have to deal with. And does that make the community bad? No, it means we have some challenges and we need to work through them. So I think that what I'm saying all I have to say, those kinds of conversations have to be bold to say, no, I'm not this or the other. Black lives matter and police lives matter and everybody's life matter. And what we're going to do is focus right now on Black Lives Matter, because right now police officers are killing at, enormous portions of unarmed African-American men. There's a problem. We need to address that. So today, this is the issue and we're going to deal with it.
Right, thank you. Tonya,
I was going to say, just too, for your listeners, in terms of just the role of oversight, going back a little bit to the former question, the role of oversight is as big as you all want it to be. And so in terms of the question earlier about culture in the police department, my ordinance doesn't allow me to do this. I only look at external complaints, but in other departments, we look at internal complaints. And that was extremely important. When I was in New Orleans, we had a group of female officers come to us that they were concerned about gender discrimination. We had African-American officers come to us, and we played a role in working with the police department to address these issues. So I would encourage you all to talk to your city council people and others and think about some of these issues. And as the police chief Hall was saying, putting people in a box, I think people put oversight in a box, and oversight is extremely important. We also help do risk management for the police department. We talk to them about, if these things are going on, this is what's going to happen to get the department sued and the city sued. And so the language that I would talk about is inclusion. And inclusion, it really includes at real ways the community having a say in community policing. No, does that mean they're the supervisor of Chief Hall? Of course not. That's not what we're talking about. But the community knows best what it needs. They know what's happening day to day in their neighborhoods. And so we need to hear from them, and we need to hear from them and adjust some of our policies to address those issues that are going on. There are so many communities that feel over-policed. The other communities that don't feel like they're policed at all. The police don't even come. And so to me, this is a time about inclusion. This is a time about partnership. This is a time about working together. And I think that given this climate, given how people have just been mobilized because of what they saw with George Floyd, et cetera, that this is a time where I think the community, the police, and other stakeholders can really come to the table and have real meaningful discussions about how can we be safer? How can the officers be safe? How can the citizens be safe? How can we work together to do that? So my word during this time is inclusion, cooperation, and working together.
Chief Diamond, you want last comment?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Listen, every police officer I've ever hired, trained, led, I've said the same thing too. I said, if you want to get it down to what we're about protecting the human rights, the civil rights, and the dignity of every single human being we come into contact with, first and foremost. If you're coming into the police service and you're delivering police service and you don't believe that and you don't deliver on that every day, then you should not be carrying a badge.
Great, thank you so much for your comments. Joel, I don't know if there were questions that I think we have a couple of minutes to address.
Right, so we do have a couple. First one from Joan Berger, and she asks, how do you screen during the recruitment process up front for the kind of police officer temperament that you want in a reimagined police force that is open-minded and reflective rather than reactive? And as a psychologist, she wonders if our current evaluation tools are adequate for this purpose. And Chief Hall, let's start with you on that.
So that is an excellent question. And what we know is that all of our recruits go through an extensive psychological background. And that psychological test is designed identify certain characteristics within an individual. So what I would say is that there's probably room for that psychological evaluation to be advanced, because as we grow and understand what we're looking for in officers, and we've always wanted, as Chief Diamond talked about, even Ms. McClary talked about, we all want officers who are going to put the community first, who have a servant's heart, who truly represent the integrity. There's some things that our recruitment process and our training process cannot control for. We just can't control. I don't think there's a test for racism. I don't think that there's a test for how individuals going to interact in certain situations. But from a psychological perspective, that the doctor may have some sort of screening that may identify some characteristics that we may not be able to within our training program and our initial recruitment process, because we're looking for individuals with integrity, and we're looking at their background, what they've done before, their social media. So we go extensive, but there's some things that we can't control for that maybe a psychological exam may be able to.
Thank you. Ms. McClary?
I mean, I think Chief Hall really said it. It is really in tools, but also it's in the continuing training. As you know, officers get training throughout their tenure in the police department, in service and other things. So it's looking creatively at things, doing trainings on like implicit bias, doing trainings on culture, et cetera. And so I agree with the chief. Sometimes you can't really maybe have a test on it, but as the police department grows and does its in-service and training of the officers over time, to continue to remind them about things that are important, to continue to remind them that they have biases and other things and how to overcome them. So not just when they're in the academy, but also continuing to give them in-services and other things throughout their career that hopefully will keep them grounded in the work that they're doing and the importance of their role in the community.
And I would just add that to that very important question, that groups tend to hire the people who are making the selection to hire people who look and talk like them. And so it's important in the preliminary stages of hiring and screening that if you want a diverse police agency that brings eclectic feelings to the service, then you need to have others other than the 5 guys who sit on the screening board. And in most police departments, those, you know, I was screened when I was hired at Tulsa Police Department by 6 white captains, you know, and they were going to hire white guys that looked like them. There was no doubt. I slipped through, you know, but at the end of the day, paying attention to the details of who's hiring, who's making that decision, and what we're building into that decision making is vital to getting this right.
Thank you. And I'll remind people that they can email questions to dallas@ajc.org. We are at 9 o'clock, but we will do 1 or 2 more questions. Drew's going to have to take off, so I will let him answer this one first if he has the time. Drew, you spoke earlier about the 3 categories: perpetrators, upstanders, and bystanders. From looking at the George Floyd murder and others, we appear to have far too many bystanders that enable those perpetrators. How do we work to better ensure that our police departments around the country create a culture in which more people stand up, more people are upstanders and don't just sit idly by while these horrors happen?
Sadly, that's correct. Most police officers to these incidences become bystanders. Even their supervisors become bystanders. And there has to be two things. They have to be trained and led up to and disciplined up to the idea that if you really are who you say you are and you want people to believe you are brave and heroic, then the time to be brave and heroic is when you're facing your own officers. And those officers, and there's a lot of history in this, the officers, I came up with officers who were upstanding. They risked their career, they risked their lives in order to stand up inside a police agency. This is challenging stuff. But the more we support that, the more we make that heroic. That is, I know dozens and dozens, and particularly a lot of the racially biased shootings and violence that we've seen, that all it would take was one of those officers, going back to the Rodney King beating, to step in and say, stop. And I can take the high road and be self-righteous about this. I did that in my career. I know officers who have done that. I know it can be done. The trouble is, it's rare, and we're not creating agency atmospheres that make that the norm, not the exception.
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing me, guys. I do have to go. This has been a pleasure to interact with you all. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. McClary, we'll let you answer it, and then we'll have a final word on the subject from Chief Hall, and then we'll close out.
I think Chief Diamond spoke to a lot of it, but this is also another area where civilians, the community, can have a role. When I was in New Orleans, the community came together with the police department and designed a program called EPIC, which is Ethical Policing is Courageous. And so this was an effort of both the community members and police department to come together, and it's like a peer mentoring program. Their officers are encouraged to do ethical policing, where they're encouraged to intervene and step in when they see their fellow officers doing something that's not ethical. And so I know other police departments are looking at this around the country, but I want to just say, as someone that was there on the ground when this was being formed, that this was something that the community and the police department did together. And so I'm always going to be the voice of the community in these discussions and talk about the important role that they play. But there are systems in place, and Chief Hall will talk about this, her duty to intervene policy that she's put into place very recently. So I don't want to steal her thunder from her answer, but she's already working on some of these issues. And I would just encourage more community involvement in these discussions. And the community also has a role to play in helping figure out how to make police officers more accountable to one another out in the field.
Thank you.
So thank you, Ms. McClary, for that. And one of the things that Chief Diamond talked about that's truly important is creating and fostering an atmosphere of intolerance for bystanders, and disciplining to the point of termination for individuals who have a bystander mentality. So what we're doing in the police department, and have been doing since September of 2017, is holding individuals accountable. We do have a duty to intervene policy that's recent, but we always had the premise in place and the language in place. Now it is clear in black and white. When Ms. McClary talks about EPIC, we just finished, 14 of our members of the Dallas Police Department just finished the EPIC training with New Orleans. Ethical policing is contagious, because those are some of the best practices from around the country to create the training and fostering that environment in the city of Dallas alongside of the community to make sure that we are working together on what truly is ethical policing and what that looks like. Each one of our desires for this committed language has to have an evergreen approach, which means it has to be in everything we do. It can't just be in a policy. It has to be in how we interact with our community. It has to be in every facet of the police department so that it is a part of the fabric of who we are. It cannot just be language. I think gone are the days where the community is looking for us to say the right things. We have to do the right things, and we have to do them on a regular basis. So that is what we're working alongside of our oversight board to make sure that we have our finger on the pulse of what the community wants to see. So that's where we are right now.
And Joel, I just want to put in one plug for your members that are listening. I'm at the June Community Police Oversight Board meeting. They voted to have non-board members on the subcommittee. And then at the July and August meetings, we finally put into place procedures. So we are now taking members of the community to be a part of our subcommittees. And so if people are interested in that, they can get a hold of me. We want people to be diverse. We want people from all of the districts around the city of Dallas, but there is an opportunity for community members to be a part of the board and work on its subcommittee. So that was just recently passed. I wanted to put that opportunity out there. And if anybody's interested in that or has questions about it, they can contact me. So we're always looking to expand the community voice in the board.
Thank you. That's great to know. I'm sure that you'll have some takers from this group. I'd like to thank both you, Ms. McClary, and Chief Hall for being so generous with your time and your insights and perspectives. Rabbi Paley, thank you for taking the helm and moderating this session, and for your time and energy, especially as you're moving into high holiday planning season. Especially in such a unique year to be in the middle of high holiday planning season. As a reminder, and as the rabbi said in the beginning, the tour is an important step, but just a step in mutual understanding of very complex and long-standing issues. And these conversations are meant to be a precursor to action and eventually to advocacy. Our next session, our final session of the 5-session series, is on policy, and will be with Representatives Eddie Bernice Johnson and Mark Vesey, and we're thrilled to have them and get the opportunity to hear from their perspectives. And that will be on September 1st. We will probably later that week convene a meeting where we're going to invite anyone who has attended these sessions or is a member of the Community of Conscience Coalition to come together and discuss what our next steps might be. So please do look for an email about that. And thank you all for coming this morning, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Tonya.
Thank you. Bye-bye.